Professor, thanks for coming on.
Hi, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
So your position, tell me if I'm mischaracterizing this, is people you define as fascists do not have free speech rights.
No. My position is that communities have the right to defend themselves against groups that actively seek to eliminate members of that community.
Defend themselves against violence or defend themselves
against violence? I mean, we were talking about...
No, but physical violence? So
yes,
if I say, for example...
We're talking about a group that has a history of enacting hate crimes. Yeah, no, we're not... Are we going to pretend like we're suddenly in this ahistorical world where Dylan Roof or Wade Michael Page doesn't exist, where Anders Breivik doesn't exist? Are you kidding me?
No. Are you really a professor, by the way?
What?
So here's the question, though. Is it past statements that have espoused violence, or is it acts of violence?
It's
so
both.
could you?
Okay, but we're talking about.
Hold on. Let me just finish my question. Could you commit violence against me if you thought that I had a history of saying things that you imagined were violent?
I would never commit violence against you. I actually, when I was younger, I was a libertarian, and I actually looked up to you when you were a libertarian.
Okay, but let's take me out of this.
Okay.
Let's just, I want to know, like, the concept of self-defense is a legal concept, but it's also got, like, a long history and tradition in common law. So the idea is if I'm hitting you, if I strike you physically, if I physically commit violence against you, you have a right to commit violence back in order to protect yourself or your property.
Sure.
But you're seeming to say that anybody who has espoused ideas that have at some point in history led to violence can be the subject of violence from you. You're not saying that.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I believe it is the right for communities to get together to assess what is a threat to them and to defend themselves against that threat.
So give me an example. Like, what public figure in America right now could be shut down, could have his free speech rights taken away, and could be the subject of violence under the standards you're describing?
Well, I mean, for instance, I think that the framework here of talking about violence as opposed to talking about preserving the very freedoms that you and I both enjoy is a false one. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about a movement that actively advocates against all the fetters of democracy. I mean, we're talking about Richard Spencer, who publishes in altright.com, publishes an article on July 28th by a man named Vincent Law, where the headline was, "To protect free speech, get rid of democracy." So we really have to...
You know what? Okay, so let's use that example. I disagree with that. I haven't seen the piece, but it doesn't sound like something I'd agree with.
It's not.
Does Richard Spencer have a right to speak in public?
Richard Spencer is a danger to society. When he speaks in public, what he is doing, he is publicly recruiting people to his very violent movement, very violent ideology.
So does he have a right to speak in public?
I don't think he has a right to speak in public unopposed, and that is ultimately what the purpose of Antifa is to show up and oppose him.
But it's not opposition. You shut people down, you prevent them from speaking, and you commit violence against them. I know a number of people, well, don't tell me it's untrue, I know people who have been knocked down and beaten by people from Antifa. So that is true. It does happen. We have it on tape. We just roll the tape.
Right.
So you're saying, is that justified?
Yes. I believe that communities have the right to defend themselves against threats to their community.
Against ideas they don't like.
No,
they have a right to commit violence.
People who have explicitly said that they want to eliminate those people from our society.
But you're conflating violence with ideas.
No,
if I have not raised my hand to strike you, you have no right to strike me.
But in order to raise your hand to strike me, you have to think that you're going to strike me. And when you are going out in public as a protester, explicitly saying that you want to eliminate most of the people from this country, I believe most of the people in this country have the right to say, no, that's not okay.
Okay, but you absolutely have a right to say it's not okay. What you don't have a right is to prevent me from saying what I think, even if you disagree, and you definitely don't have a right to commit violence against me. And you're blurring the lines there. And by the way, don't you work at a criminal...
Yes, I'm in an economics department, yeah.
It's hilarious.
let me just say, I kind of agree with some of that, unexpectedly, but I think you're right. I mean, I don't blame really immigrants for anything. As people, the policies are not formulated by them. The question is who benefits from our current system, which is clearly totally dysfunctional. If you have 20 million or 22 million, north of 20 million people without papers in your country, it's clearly not working. So the question is who's benefiting from that. And there's an entire political party that hopes to sort of have a new voter base on the basis of those people. And you have, that's true, as you know. And I don't think anyone's hiding it, by the way. And if you're for that party, I mean, I guess you're for that. And then there are also, and I think you alluded to this, a lot of employers who are benefiting from that. But, and by the way, you're also right that a lot of immigrants are in fact exploited. I mean, we've created an entire serf class to serve the day-to-day needs of the rich. Like, that's just true. And by the way, if you want to see the most intense opponents of changing or fixing our immigration system, talk to like some of your rich people in my neighborhood. And it's like, well, who's going to walk the dogs while I'm at SoulCycle? Like, I'm serious. And they have I mean, we're doing that. And most people are not benefiting. Only a small number is benefiting. So, look, I would agree with a lot of what you said, or certainly the tenor of what you said. It's not their fault. But it does get to a core question, which is, do you, as a U.S. citizen, have the right to have any voice at all in who comes in? Because demographics is like one of the key questions. Who lives here? Again, not a racial question. It's a substantive factual question. And I don't think you'll find many people in this country who are opposed to immigration. We have more immigrants, aggregate, total immigrants, than any country's ever had in peacetime, ever, okay? And you don't have riots in the streets. You don't have lunatics. Lots of other countries do. South Africa right now, killing Zimbabweans because they're mad about unchecked immigration. I get it. We don't have that. We like immigrants. The question is, are we allowed to make the decision? It's our country, and in that hour, I would include lots of naturalized immigrants, including you. We all have a right to decide. So to say it's anti-immigrant, look, I'm for dinner parties. I have lots of dinner parties. I love inviting 12 people over to my house and having dinner. If you decided who they were, or said you're not allowed to decide who the 12 people are, that wouldn't be a dinner party, would it? It would be an invasion or something. It would be something I'm very much against. So the question is, where is the economic debate? I mean, and what I appreciated about your response was and I disagree with your numbers, but at least you marshaled them. Like, what is the economic effect of this? I grew up in this state. When I grew up here, it was the richest out of 50. It had the best schools out of 50. It had the most vibrant middle class out of 50. It now has, it's 48th for schools. It has more poor people than any state. Its infrastructure is crumbling, and the middle class is living in Boise. So how did that happen? There are lots of reasons it happened, but the truth is, economics is not magic. Importing millions of poor people, every one of them a good person, I'm willing to assume, doesn't make you richer. So the rest of us have a right to have that conversation. That's all I'm saying. Don't shut it down with racist, please.
But Tucker, let me follow up on that. So I think I know why California schools are disastrous, because of the propositions that did not allow us to invest in the schools, and now the private schools have created a way to have rich people bring their kids to one school and then make sure they don't pay for the other. But I want to follow up on what you said, because look, on the Statue of Liberty it says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your masses, etc." And so when the Irish were first coming in, they were dirt poor. They were escaping a famine. The Italians, dirt poor. The Jews, dirt poor. Under your logic, would we not have kept them out?
Well, no, because this is a situational. Before you applaud too vigorously, I can win you. Listen, it's a situational decision. So when we had the largest wave up until recently of immigration into this country, at the beginning of the last century, that was the industrialization period in this country. So who manned the factories? Who made the shoes? Who wove the textiles? Immigrants did. There was a massive need for labor, and we responded by importing huge amounts of labor. We did until 1924, in which case Americans, including recent naturalized immigrants, looked around and was like, you know what? We've had a lot of change. Change creates volatility in your society. We had a lot of drama, the progressive movement, the Wobblies. We had a lot going on in this country. We were like, you know what, we're shutting it down. And we shut it down from 1924 to 1965, not because we're racist, but because we made the decision. Now what we're looking at, and this is what drives me maybe craziest, is a landscape totally transformed by technology, by automation. This is not secret knowledge. Look it up. One of the reasons that people are so powerless they felt they had to vote for Donald Trump is because the value of labor is in steep decline. Immigration's part of it. Technology, I would argue, is probably even a bigger part of it. Huge sectors of the entire economy are about to be replaced by machines. This will mean massive internal displacement of workers who will have even less power than they do now. Into that, you're throwing a huge number of new people And my only question is, okay, what are they going to do in a world where a lot of the jobs now occupied by people will be occupied by machines? And the answer I get is, shut up, racist. Okay, fine. That's not actually an answer. And we have an obligation, I think, if those in my business, like, try to like convince people or whatever, to raise the question. And I can't get anybody on either side to take it seriously at all. And that's when I begin to conclude that they're totally reckless. They don't know what they're doing, almost any of them. They're lying about it, and they're wrecking the country, because that is a very obvious chain of events that's going to take place, and nobody says it.
More honest than most on the left in saying out loud what you really want. So I want to use you to inform our viewers about the aims of the left. Tell me what the justification for this group coming here is. If they wanted asylum, they could have applied in the embassy in Tegucigalpa. They're instead coming to our border. Are they claiming that they're refugees, fleeing a war? If so, what war? What is the justification for this?
Good evening. First of all, let's go to our history. Here in the Americas,
no, let's not. Let's just go to the question.
The world.
Okay.
Look at all the Europeans that came here. This was Native American land, and Europeans came here.
Okay. You've demonstrated an ignorance of history sufficient that I don't want you trying to educate us. And then I just want you to answer my question about right now, if that's okay. If we just stick to the question, what is the justification, the legal justification, for these people coming to our border and not the U.S. Embassy in Tegucigalpa?
Well, if you look at the role of the United States in Central America, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Guatemala, and other countries in Latin America, the United States has promoted wars to protect corporate interests in a lot of these countries. And so you have a lot of people who have been affected by these wars, and it's caused poverty in a lot of these countries. And currently there is a political climate in a lot of these countries, and people are coming here looking for refugee. And
so let's hold on. No, okay, I'm going to try and take you seriously.
The United Nations is supporting. Okay. Did you know that? The United Nations
it doesn't,
is out there right
nothing
now.
the United Nations does matters to me or surprises me. But let me hold on. Let me just ask you.
Through the caravan.
I'm trying to take you seriously. You said most of them in the first caravan are coming from Honduras. What war specifically are you talking about that the United States promoted? Whose interests were benefiting from that war? And when did that war end? What are you talking about specifically?
Specifically, look at the role of the U.S. government in Honduras. I mean, we can go here all day, all night.
What war
but
are you talking about?
Time. So I want to make
just
sure
give me
that
the war. Tell me when it ended.
Understand that
I'm trying.
Okay, let me ask you this: do you know of any involvement of the U.S. in Honduras?
So what you're saying is you don't really know what you're. Hold on. What you're saying is you don't really know what you're talking about, but you're throwing out a talking point.
Then we need to have a show just to talk about the U.S. government's involvement in Central America and the rest of Latin America.
I'm asking you specifically, what war in Honduras are you talking about that the United States inspired that justifies this migrant caravan? What war? When did that war end? What year? What are you talking about, or do you not know?
What I do. Okay, let's look at the role of the military of the U.S. currently in Honduras.
No, but you said there was a war. So you're totally ignorant of the history of Honduras, but you are lecturing us about our responsibility to let these people in because of a war that we started, but you can't tell us what war or what year it ended. I think that's what you're saying.
And not only that, but it's the involvement of the U.S. in Honduras and Central America. We've talked about this
so
before.
Obviously history is not your subject. Let's go to something.
And that's fine with me.
I'm not sure we're disagreeing.
That the United Nations currently is supporting this caravan. Why would the United Nations be supporting and helping these people? And
not account. I can't imagine why the UN does a lot of things.
That the U.S. should stop Mexico from letting these people come here.
Let me. We're going to change the category to the 200 category. Let's see if you can answer this. Okay. San Francisco has now announced that illegal aliens, people who have no right to be here, will be allowed to vote in local school board elections. You live in the city. You think this is a great idea. Do you think Americans who sneak into other people's countries ought to be allowed to vote in their elections?
Well, let's look at how many white people live in Mexico. The Mexican government doesn't harass them. But let's look at...
Are they allowed to vote in elections?
Look how many people did not vote in this last election. Look at the numbers.
Okay. I would say as a performance artist, you're talented, but I just want to get one straight answer. Are Americans who sneak into other people's countries without permission allowed, do they have a right to vote in those countries' elections? Do I have a right to sneak into Mexico and announce that I get to vote there? And if you don't let me, you're a racist. Is that a human right that I possess?
So let's get it clear. In San Francisco, these individuals that are being allowed to vote are only voting for the election for the members of the Board of Education.
Another question unanswered.
And
all right.
these people, right, should have the right to vote specifically for those who are going to make policies and decisions affecting their children.
Okay, so I asked you a couple simple questions. You couldn't come up with an answer. Text me later if those answers come to you. Okay. She's a sitting U.S. Senator, of course, from Hawaii, and she said that all men are implicated in sexual assault, and all women must be believed because they're women. That seems like an idea that would cut against the Western understanding of justice.
I'm not sure that that's exactly what she said. But I do think that there's something particular about crimes of sexual assault and accusations of sexual assault. And that is that it's the one crime, at least that I can think of, in which the presumption, the burden of proof is on the woman to say that she really is a victim. So last year I had my car stolen. When I reported it, I was not asked, well, what did you do wrong to allow your car to be stolen, right? And that's very different from what happens in sexual assault cases.
But you were asked questions like, no, did you leave your keys in the car? I mean, of course you were. Now, sexual assault is a more delicate issue for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But do you think that our standards of justice change? In other words, is the burden of proof lower?
Yeah.
Do you believe in the idea that a person is innocent until proved guilty? We see lawmakers challenging that idea.
I do, but again, there's something very particular about cases of sexual assault and rape, which is that, for one thing, the vast majority of women never come forward, and there's lots of reasons for this. One is basically about how difficult it is to get to trial or to get to a conviction. Another reason is just all the issues around shame, and then a final reason is some of the things that are playing out with Kavanaugh, which is peculiar issues around memory when we're talking about traumatic events.
So all of that is true. And, of course, this is a recovered memory, we now know, that came out in psychotherapy. Doesn't mean it's false. Does mean there are a lot of instances where recovered memory was false and innocent people went to prison. It happened quite a bit in the 80s around the satanic abuse ritual scares, you know. I'm not saying this is like that, but I am saying it means the rest of us have to ask real questions about it. You seem to be suggesting the standards ought to be different, that we should give her the presumption of honesty.
Yeah.
And that's not how our justice system works, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for you and for your viewers to know the context of it, which is that there's no more instances of false accusations around, say, rape and similar crimes as there is for any other crime. And I think that we. But
I'm not saying. Well, hold on. I'm not saying otherwise. I am saying there is a much higher incidence of false memory in recovered memory cases than in conventional cases. That's true, and it's been looked at extensively by social scientists, and I don't think there's any debate about that. Doesn't mean this is false, but it means that if you want justice, if that's your goal, then you have to ask hard questions. But again, I don't understand. Have we changed the standards or haven't we? We see all these members of Congress saying, he's a man, he's guilty. She's a woman, you must believe for.
Again, no one said that exactly.
Actually, here's Richard Blumenthal saying the onus is on him to prove he's innocent.
Right.
Is that how our system works? I thought it was the opposite of how it worked.
Yeah, again, the reason is because he has said it absolutely didn't happen. Fabrication, right? This isn't a criminal trial, but it is something in which he is asking for a very large promotion to the Supreme Court of the United States, right? So you want somebody who has impeccable character, whose motives absolutely cannot be questioned, and he's given us nothing but doubt throughout these confirmation
But hold on, wait. So it's the principle, leaving Kavanaugh aside, because these are lawmakers. They're the most powerful people in our society. They determine what our laws laws are by definition.
Sure.
They're saying that the accused has an obligation and has a responsibility to come forward with evidence to rebut the claims.
Mm-hmm.
That is, again, precisely the opposite of English common law on which our system is based. No one has ever said that before that I'm aware of in the history of my living history anyway. And you're okay with that?
Yeah, what I think should happen is actually what both Dr. Ford and now Ramirez believe should happen, which is that there should be an FBI investigation.
But hold on, are you?
Right?
But he's saying Judge Kavanaugh has a responsibility to come forward with evidence to rebut the charges. Do you or don't you think that's a fair standard?
I do think that, yes, if we're going to have this conversation about whether or not these things happened, and he doesn't want an FBI investigation, which, by the way, he does not, then sure, yes, he's going to have to
Okay, so if I accuse you
of
of something with no physical evidence or eyewitnesses, which is what she has done from 36 years ago, and it's a sex crime that would destroy your reputation and hurt your family, you now have a moral obligation or a responsibility, as Senator from Connecticut says, to rebut that? That's what you're saying?
You have an obligation, yes, to defend yourself. Now, again, he has decided that he doesn't want an FBI investigation. That's what the Republican Party has said. And that they also don't want
So you
Mark
want to live
Judge,
in that country where the accused has a responsibility. And if you can't find evidence to disprove the charge, which has no evidence to support it in the first place, then you are presumed guilty.
Is anybody saying that he's going to go to jail? No, they're saying maybe he won't be a Supreme Court justice.
You mean he has
That's
two
okay.
little girls and a wife, and he's being accused of a sex crime by someone who has zero evidence it happened and multiple witnesses who say it didn't. And now we're saying that this guy has to prove that he's innocent? You really want to live in that country? Honestly, sincere question.
Yeah, no, sincere answer, which is that I think that right now there is a very disproportionate sense of justice for women who have come forward with these crimes. And I think that right now we tend not to believe them. And I think that all that Senator Hirono and others are saying is that maybe sometimes if we've learned anything from, say, the Me Too movement, it's that these things happen all of the time, and we should believe women.
And so do false claims. I was the subject of one of them, so I can tell you a lot about that if you're interested. Maybe later. Christy, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
But in the last 6 months, he has become famous in his own right. He's now one of the most consistent fixtures on cable news in this country. He's appeared on CNN and MSNBC literally hundreds of times, but he's moving beyond being a mere television celebrity. He's now talking about running for office for president. He's released his positions on major issues. He's traveled to Iowa and New Hampshire and Michigan and Ohio. He seems serious about it. We've invited him on the show many times to talk about his plans, but he's always declined until tonight. He's now agreed to appear on our set, provided we give him time to state his case, and we're, of course, happy to do that. In the past, he's also demanded that we stop referring to him by a certain unflattering nickname. And we haven't agreed to that demand, but tonight, as a gesture of goodwill, we will not use that nickname, because we're always grateful when guests are brave enough to show up in person, including in this case. And he joins us now. Thanks a lot for coming on. So, I mean, we could sit and hurl insults at each other for the segment. Already done that. I've certainly insulted you. You've insulted me. But you seem smart. So let me take you seriously as someone who wants to be involved in the public conversation and ask you about things that you have said on questions of policy to flesh them out a little bit. So this is you at a rally in July. I think it was the day after the president spoke with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. And you were addressing a rally. And here's what you said. Watch.
What Vladimir Putin and Russia did to this country in connection with the 2016 election is no different than if they had placed 100,000 troops on our border. This was an invasion. It was an electronic invasion. It used hackers and tweeters to elect this president.
So if Russia had 100,000 troops on our border, I mean, that would be an act of war, a profound provocation. What would be the rational response to that if you really felt the threat was that profound? If you were president, how would you respond to that?
Well, Tucker, I understood that I was coming on your show tonight to talk about the case involving my client.
Well, I didn't tell you that, and I'm happy to talk about the case. But I just played you a clip.
Tucker, you got to stop. Tucker, you got to stop interrupting me, okay? Because one of the conditions of me coming on tonight was that you were not going to do what you do routinely to guests, which is talk over them and interrupt them. So just let me finish with my answer, okay? Let me finish with my answer.
I said I'd give you a fair interview. I actually don't have an interest in squabbling with you at all or name calling. I've done a lot of that to you, and
right,
but
not to me. No, but not to my face.
I could, but what's the point? I want to take you seriously. I'm serious.
Okay.
So I just played a clip of what you said at a rally. You're traveling to states because you want to influence policy direction.
Correct.
I don't think it's unfair to ask you about something that you said.
What's the question?
And the question, let me restate it, is you said that Russia has done something that is equivalent to putting 100,000 troops on our border. That's an act of war.
Correct.
And I wonder two things. One, what you would do as president if that happened under your watch. And two, what do you think Russia thinks watching public figures like you say that we're at war with Russia? What effect do you think that has?
Well, first of all, there's no question that Russia interfered with the 2016 election in a very serious way. The only question is, what was the involvement in Donald Trump or by Donald Trump and his cronies in the process? Okay. And that's what Bob Mueller's in the process of getting to the bottom of.
But how should we as a country respond?
There you go, interrupting me again. Okay. So how should we respond?
Yes, I asked you 3 times.
We should respond with the absolute force of the law. We should be doing everything in our power to bring those individuals to justice, those individuals that are also in Russia. And let me tell you what we should not be doing. We should not be standing shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Putin and choosing Russia over the hardworking men and women of the intelligence community that risk their lives for this country. So the president has sold out the United States for the benefit of Putin.
The administration announced today a new round of even tougher sanctions against Russia. Do you support that?
I think it's a start, but I don't think it's
what would be the end?
I don't think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think the president has shown any leadership relating
sanctions
to Vladimir,
are not a step in the right direction?
No, I said it's a step, but it's not enough.
Okay.
I believe that President Trump should demand the extradition of each and every individual in Russia that Bob Mueller and others believe were responsible for the election meddling in 2016.
Okay, so
I think
a number of people have been charged.
Okay,
that's a start.
I think that's a
but
start.
what's I mean, if you really believe that it's the same as 100,000, what I'm saying is you're using reckless rhetoric on a subject you don't really understand that increases the temperature between the United States and a nuclear-armed adversary. Is that a responsible thing to do?
I think under the circumstances, I stand by my words, and I think for you to lecture...
That it's 100,000 troops on the border?
I think for you to lecture me about reckless rhetoric is rather ironic, Tucker, in light of some of the reckless rhetoric that you engage in each and every day on this show.
Reckless rhetoric. Okay. So you've said that you are a civil libertarian, in effect. You're a libertarian on sex questions. And that's fine with me. Does it bother you that the Obama administration authorized spying on American citizens connected to a rival presidential campaign?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's been established that that occurred, number one.
That Carter Page was spied on?
I don't believe that that's been established, number one, that, in fact, President Obama authorized
his administration authorized
Are you going to interrupt me for the entire segment?
I'm
or just
clarifying because I don't think you understand the question.
No, I do
The Obama
understand
administration authorized spying on an American citizen connected to the Trump campaign. Does that bother you at all?
First of all, I don't think that's been established. If it was established, of course it would bother me. Are we going to get to the facts of my client's case?
Yeah,
are we
let me ask you one last real adult question first,
okay,
because you're traveling around the country as a commentator on politics, and I'm interested to know what you think. I don't think that's illegitimate. So it has not been established that Carter Page was spied on? Is that what you're saying?
How many times are you going to ask me the same question? I've already stated that, in my view, I don't believe that President Obama has been shown to have authorized the spying, quote unquote.
The Obama administration. Why dodge the question? Look, you traveled here with policy advisors who've worked on other campaigns to the show tonight.
I have no idea.
I think you'd be ready for a simple question.
I didn't.